Hey there, folks. Thanks for joining me for Broadband Deployment News. There are two Senate Democrats that are trying to reintroduce Title II net neutrality regulations. Be right back and we'll discuss that. Thanks for joining me. Rick Husey here with Broadband Deployment News. So as I mentioned, there are two Senate Democrats. Ed Markey is one of them, trying to introduce net neutrality regulations. So this is something that we've kind of dealt with over the last few years and kind of comes back and around. It's the revolving door of net neutrality. So they're trying to do this again. I don't think it's going to go anywhere, but I wanted to discuss this and just kind of talk through the issue real quick. So you see here, Massachusetts Democrat reportedly taking the latest shot at Title II return. Senators Ed Markey and Ron Wyden, so we've got Massachusetts and Oregon, are introducing a bill that would reclassify internet service providers under Title II of the Communications Act, mandatory access regulations, and pave the way for a possible return of network neutrality rules. So Title II is the Communications Act that all telephone companies have to operate under. Then there's Title I, which is more for information services, which is a lighter touch. But what happened basically was in, I think it was 2015, the Obama administration the FCC there did go ahead under the Obama administration and classify internet service providers as Title II communications providers. And what that did was it basically laid on top of ISPs all of these onerous telecom regulations, a whole bunch of which really didn't apply. And there was nothing really specific. You had this issue where there could have been creep in these regulations over time because Title II is this huge thing, right? And so they were trying to do that through by reclassifying ISPs this way. So then in 2017, the Trump administration reversed that. They reversed that rule, and that's been the case since. Is that there's been really no net neutrality regulations. Now, I've always been, and I've talked about this for years, I've always been of a mind that, regulations should be put in place when there's an issue. And if something's not getting resolved, then you do that. We want a light touch if at all possible, because regulations add costs to businesses. And when you add costs to businesses, that adds costs or prices for us, the consumers. And especially at a time like this when we're trying to get more broadband out there, trying to close the digital divide, we've got lots of money being focused on getting broadband built and making sure that people can get access to it, making sure that as much as possible people will adopt it, that it's equitable across the board. And as you add more cost to ISPs, that means less of the money or more of the money that you're giving them or that they're going to have to use is going to have to go towards regulations rather than trying to do the stuff that we want to get done. So we've never had really much of an issue with net neutrality. It's one of these, I think, regulations that are in search of a problem for the most part. There were a couple of things prior to the Obama administration putting anything in place. There were some things that happened early on. There was an issue where Comcast was throttling BitTorrent traffic. At that time, BitTorrent was a significant issue for ISPs because what it basically allowed people to do, it still allows them to do this, but it's not as much of an issue these days. It's allowed people to host basically a server at home on their residential internet account with BitTorrent. And then they would put pirated software up there. So it could be pirated software, pirated movies, those kinds of things. And anybody else on the internet could go out and grab that from that person. So what that was doing basically was that ISP, they've got that one customer. That customer is acting almost like a business. They've got a server out there, and everybody in the world could go get this information. So it was putting a lot of traffic on the ISP's network from people that were not their customers. Obviously, the person that had the BitTorrent server had the software stored on their computer at home, that was a customer, but everybody else getting that information from them was not. So that was a big problem for ISPs. There were lots of solutions coming out to help them throttle that traffic, and Comcast was doing that. But what became an issue was it wasn't just, after a while, it wasn't just pirated software. It was actually things like gaming updates, for example, for gaming software would be a legitimate use of BitTorrent for a company that was doing that, and yet that was also blocking that. So Comcast, they're not doing that now, so that was resolved. The FCC did get involved. I think Comcast even sued the FCC and may have won, but I think I believe that the issue was resolved and that Comcast is not doing that. And really, I don't think any service providers now are throttling information like that. So that was resolved without regulations. And there was an issue where I think Apple was not allowing people to use Skype based on a request from AT&T. That's kind of a competitive thing there. The FCC got involved in that and both Apple and AT&T backed off. So the FCC again was able to do something without having any onerous Title II regulations in place. And then the regulations, net neutrality regulations, were put in place, as I mentioned, in 2015. Nothing changed, right? Because there was still no issues. And then they were removed in 2017, and here we are 2022, and still we have net neutrality. There's no issues going on. And if an issue were to come up, it could be addressed, as it had been in the past. So I don't think there's a need for this, but these guys are pushing this now. It says here, the bill is unlikely to get much traction given how complicated and divisive the issue of net neutrality is, and due to the relative handful of legislative days before the midterm elections, in which Republicans who strongly oppose Title II for the internet are likely to regain control of the House, and very possibly the Senate as well. Both sides in the net neutrality debate would like to get some closure on the issue rather than see the FCC classifying and reclassifying ISPs as the political majority changes. And that's what you have when you don't do things legislatively. It's the same thing with executive orders, right? When a president issues an executive order, it's fine. They don't have as much power when you do that as you do with legislation. And also, it can be reversed as soon as the next president comes into office. So you have the same issue here as Congress changes back and forth, which is very likely in the next set of midterms here coming up in November. The FCC, though, is currently at a 2-2 political tie, so there will be no move to reclassify ISPs there anytime soon. And we're at a 2-2 tie. There's one candidate that they have out that has got a lot of baggage as far as statements made in the past that might make it where they're not necessarily seen as unbiased. So there's been a lot of fight on that, and they're still trying to push that candidate, and that's not going anywhere at the moment. So FCC, again, at a 2-2 tie, Republican-Democrat, basically. While Republicans have signaled that they can accept some version of the net neutrality rules, such as prohibitions against blocking, throttling, or anti-competitive paid prioritization, they don't want a return of the Title II Common Carrier Light regime and even the hint of possible rate regulation. So they certainly don't want anything there that says that ISPs have rate regulations where they can only charge so much. They want, obviously, the free market to decide that. Democrats like Markey argue Title II is needed for a truly open internet, but if that were the case, we wouldn't have a truly open internet right now, and we wouldn't have had that for the last several years that there have been no regulations in. So I don't see how he can make an argument since we have a truly open internet right now. The COVID-19 pandemic has made it more clear than ever that broadband internet is a necessity, not a luxury. Evan Greer, director of the nonprofit advocacy group and Title II proponent Fight for the Future, said, "The FCC is supposed to ensure everyone has affordable access to broadband and prevent telecom companies from abusing their monopoly power or charging an unfair fee." But actually, that's not, I don't think the FCC has anything to do with broadband providers and whether they're able to charge whatever they want. And again, the free market is supposed to determine what people are willing to pay. But because of the Trump administration's disastrous repeal of Title II protections, the agency is currently unable to do any of that. So he says it's a disastrous repeal. Again, there's been no change since the repeal. The internet's, if you want to go somewhere on the internet, and that's the main thing, is you don't want to be blocked from going anywhere, you can go there, right? And that's, again, that is in the best interest of your internet service provider. They don't want to block you, right? They want you to be able to go. I mean, there were these some anti-competitive things earlier on with maybe blocking a video service or a competitive phone service. But again, that was all handled without regulations. So it was determined that that could be handled without that. So you can get anywhere you want. It's in the ISP's interest that you can do that, as long as it's legal content. Right now, there's illegal content out there that we don't want people going to, child pornography, that kind of thing. But if there's legal content, you can get there. So it says, this bill would fix that by restoring the FCC's ability to protect the public, she said. It will give the agency the authority it needs to restore net neutrality and address the digital divide. Well, under the Trump administration, the FCC and the FTC got together and they issued a joint statement on how they were planning on acting as far as if there were any issues that needed to be addressed. So the FCC and the FTC together have the oversight and the enforcement power to be able to handle any issues. So if somebody does something that seems to be anti-competitive or in some way blocking people's access to the internet, even I think paid prioritization now, if that were to occur, then the FCC and the FTC can address that. So again, we haven't seen any of that since the drop of the network or net neutrality regulations. The U.S. Telecom Trade Association said telecom providers already adhere to net neutrality practices, which is true. They are now because they know the FCC and the FTC can come down on them. And there's less reason, some reasons now for them to do that. I think people have, there's less anti-competitive issues now and less of this BitTorrent stuff that's concerning people. So there hasn't been as much of a need for them to try to get around it. It said consumers should expect Congress to codify. So again, they're saying we should expect Congress to codify this, and that is the way to handle that. Is if we think there's a need, then Congress needs to come out and say, okay, here's a specific set of regulations or a law that will cover net neutrality. Not trying to shoehorn Title II communications regulations onto ISPs, which was a bad idea, and that's what was reversed under the Trump administration. It says, but let's be clear, any such legislation cannot and must not be a backdoor for government to regulate prices and degrade the consumer internet experience, the group said, attributing the sentiment to CEO Jonathan Spalter. So again, they're saying, yeah, it's okay to do certain, if you want to put legislation out there to do some of these limited net neutrality kind of regulations to make sure these certain things don't happen, that's fine, but this should not be saying that the government can come in and regulate prices because again, these internet providers, these are private companies and they price their services based on their cost, and then they also take into account their competition. And how many customers they think they're going to get at that price. So it's the free market, and the free market works. So if something's not broken, don't try to fix it. If you don't need regulations, don't put them on the company, because that's just going to raise prices. When you add regulations, it generally means that, and especially when the government does it, when they especially these huge regulation packages, it means that ISPs of all sizes, small ones and big ones, are going to have to address those regulations and put people in place and policies in place and sometimes equipment in place to measure stuff and this and that. And it winds up costing money, and then they have to pass it on to you, the consumer. So if you don't, again, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And that's my opinion on that. So this is not going to go anywhere. Certainly even if it did, I don't think much would happen before the midterms, and it would be immediately overturned, because it's looking every day more and more like the Republicans are going to take control of Congress, certainly the House, and very, very possibly the Senate as well, to be able to do that. So they would just reverse it back again. Thanks for joining me. If this was interesting or helpful, please give me a like on the video. I'd appreciate that. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button down on YouTube or down in the right corner of the video there, and just click subscribe. Click the little bell to be notified when I'm live. And I'm live every day with a broadcast, either Broadband Deployment News or Tech Tuesday on Tuesdays. So I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.